The dust kicked up by the convoy trucks painted everything in a hazy brown film as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her gear in the back of the Humvee. The other soldiers around her were talking loudly over the engine noise, sharing stories from their last deployment, and comparing combat experiences. Maria listened quietly, her dark eyes scanning the terrain through the small, bulletproof window. "Hey Santos, you ever been in a real firefight?" asked Corporal Jenkins from across the vehicle. The question carried that tone she'd heard countless times before, the assumption that someone like her hadn't seen real action. Maria simply shrugged and gave a small smile. "Not much to speak of," she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the rumbling engine. The other soldiers exchanged glances that said everything about what they thought of her combat readiness. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar quiet strength in people from your community who surprised everyone when it mattered most. The convoy was heading toward Forward Operating Base Cherokee, a small outpost near the contested border region. Maria had been assigned to logistics and supply coordination, a role that kept her busy with inventory sheets and equipment manifests while others planned tactical operations. The convoy rolled through the checkpoint gates of Forward Operating Base Cherokee just as the sun reached its peak in the desert sky. Maria stepped down from the Humvee and immediately felt the weight of curious stares from the soldiers already stationed at the base. She slung her standard-issue rifle over her shoulder and grabbed her duffel bag, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to military life. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, briefed the new arrivals in the operations tent. He pointed to various positions on the tactical map spread across the table, his weathered finger tracing patrol routes and defensive positions. Maria stood at the back of the group, absorbing every detail, while her fellow soldiers focused mainly on their immediate assignments. "Santos, you'll be working with Sergeant Murphy in the supply depot," Hayes announced without looking up from his paperwork. "Standard inventory management and equipment distribution. Murphy will show you the ropes." As the briefing dispersed, Maria noticed how the other soldiers automatically grouped together, discussing their assignments with animated enthusiasm. She walked alone toward the supply depot, her boots crunching softly on the gravel paths between the prefabricated buildings. The afternoon heat shimmered off the metal rooftops, and she could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the east. Sergeant Murphy proved to be a gruff but efficient supervisor who had been managing the supply depot for nearly 18 months. He walked Maria through the warehouse-style building, pointing out sections for ammunition, medical supplies, communication equipment, and personal gear. The organization was meticulous, with everything labeled and cataloged according to military specifications. "You seem like you know your way around equipment," Murphy observed as Maria quickly identified various weapon components and radio parts without needing explanations. "Most of the new logistics people need a week just to learn where everything goes." Maria nodded and continued checking inventory sheets against the actual supplies. Her movements were precise and methodical, but Murphy noticed something unusual about the way she handled certain items. When she picked up a scope or examined ammunition specifications, her touch suggested familiarity that went beyond basic training. The depot stayed busy throughout the afternoon as soldiers came and went, requisitioning gear for various missions and maintenance duties. Maria processed each request efficiently, always maintaining a professional but quiet demeanor. She listened carefully to conversations about patrol schedules and defensive positions, filing away information with the instinctive awareness of someone trained to notice tactical details. As evening approached, the base settled into its routine rhythm of guard rotations and perimeter checks. Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her glasses and double-checked the mission briefing one more time, her fingers tracing the tactical maps spread across the metal table in the operations center. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled pilots and officers who filled the cramped room with nervous energy and the smell of strong coffee. Captain Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched her meticulous preparation. "Hey, Chun," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "You sure you're in the right room?" The supply depot meeting is down the hall. His comment drew chuckle from several other officers, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral, continuing to study the reconnaissance photos that showed enemy positions along the contested border. She had grown accustomed to these comments over the past 6 months since her transfer to Falcon Base, where her administrative rank and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for the more seasoned combat veterans. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have military families in your area who face similar challenges. The tension in the room was palpable as Colonel Martinez entered, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the assembled personnel, unaware that within hours everything would change. Colonel Martinez slammed a red folder onto the table, the sharp sound cutting through the room's chatter like a blade. "Gentlemen, ladies, we have a situation," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades in combat zones. "Intelligence reports indicate enemy forces have mobilized 3 battalions along Sector 7. We need immediate air reconnaissance and potential tactical response." The pilots straightened in their seats, coffee cups forgotten as the gravity of the mission settled over them. Captain Rodriguez cracked his knuckles and leaned forward, his earlier smugness replaced by focused intensity. "Sir, my squadron can be airborne in 20 minutes, he declared confidently. Sarah remained silent, her eyes scanning the tactical data that others seemed to be overlooking. The timing patterns, the positioning coordinates, something about the enemy movement didn't align with standard offensive strategies. Her mind raced through countless hours of advanced tactical analysis training that nobody in this room knew she possessed. Major Thompson gestured dismissively in her direction without even looking at her. "Chun, you can coordinate communications from a base. Make sure the coffee stays hot while the real soldiers handle this mission." More laughter rippled through the room, but Sarah noticed Colonel Martinez studying the maps with growing concern, his weathered fingers tracing the same patterns that had caught her attention. Outside, the sound of jet engines warming up on the runway created a low rumble that seemed to match the growing tension in Sarah's chest. The briefing room emptied quickly as pilots rushed to their aircraft, leaving Sarah alone with the scattered intelligence reports and the lingering smell of jet fuel that drifted through the ventilation system. She gathered the papers methodically, but her trained eye continued analyzing the enemy positions that everyone else had accepted at face value. Something was wrong with the intelligence assessment. The enemy formations were too exposed, too convenient, positioned exactly where conventional wisdom would expect them to be. Sarah pulled out her personal tablet and began cross-referencing satellite imagery timestamps with weather patterns and known enemy tactical preferences from her classified training modules. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, accessing databases that most personnel at Falcon Base didn't even know existed. The patterns became clearer with each data point she analyzed. This wasn't a standard offensive formation. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to lure their fastest response teams into a predetermined kill zone. Through the operations center window, she watched Captain Rodriguez and his squadron taxi toward the runway, their F-16s gleaming in the afternoon sun. Radio chatter crackled through the speakers as ground control cleared them for takeoff, unaware that they were potentially flying directly into an ambush that could cost them everything. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized the full scope of the deception, but protocol demanded she report her findings through proper channels that had already dismissed her as irrelevant. Maria could not stand idle any longer as she watched the rescue team struggle with impossible logistics and tactical challenges. The enemy had chosen their ambush site with deadly precision, creating a kill zone that would trap any conventional rescue attempt in the same crossfire that had pinned down Jenkins and his squad. "Sir," she said quietly to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, her voice cutting through the chaos of the communications center. "I need to speak with you privately." Hayes looked at her with surprise, clearly wondering what a logistics coordinator could possibly contribute to this critical military situation. But something in her tone and the steady confidence in her dark eyes made him pause his frantic planning and step aside with her. "The terrain maps show elevated positions to the north and east," Maria continued, pointing to specific coordinates on the tactical display. If someone could reach those ridge lines, they would have clear sight lines to the enemy positions without exposing themselves to return fire. Hayes studied the maps more carefully, realizing she was right about the tactical advantages those positions offered. But getting someone up there undetected would require specialized skills that his current personnel might not possess. "What exactly are you suggesting, Santos?" he asked, beginning to sense there was more to this quiet soldier than her personnel file indicated. The situation was desperate enough that he was willing to consider any viable option. Maria reached into her pocket and withdrew a set of credentials that she had kept hidden since arriving at the forward operating base. The identification cards bore special markings and clearance levels that immediately caught Hayes' attention, causing his eyes to widen as he processed what he was seeing. Staff Sergeant Santos, Classified Special Operations. Hayes read aloud in disbelief. Precision Marksman Qualification, Advanced Tactical Reconnaissance, Specialized Counter-Sniper Operations. How long have you been operating undercover here? 3 weeks, sir, Maria replied calmly. My primary mission was intelligence gathering, but circumstances have changed. Those men out there are going to die unless someone with my specific skill set intervenes immediately. The radio crackled again, with Jenkins' increasingly desperate voice reporting that enemy forces were preparing for a final assault on their position. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated, and conventional rescue options were proving completely inadequate for the tactical situation. Hayes looked back at the terrain maps with new understanding, realizing that Maria possessed exactly the specialized training needed to reach those elevated positions and provide the precision fire support that could save the trap patrol. Her cover assignment in logistics had been perfect camouflage for her true capabilities. "What do you need from me?" Hayes asked, his tone shifting to one of complete military professionalism as he recognized her expertise. Within minutes, Maria had assembled her specialized equipment from a locked case that she retrieved from her personal gear. The precision rifle was a custom-built weapon designed for long-range tactical operations, far beyond anything available in the standard base armory. She checked each component with the fluid efficiency of someone who had performed these preparations countless times under combat conditions. "I need a spotter and communication support," she told Hayes as she adjusted the rifle's scope and attached a suppressor to minimize muzzle flash. "The enemy cannot know where the shots are coming from, or they will redirect their fire toward the ridgeline." Hayes assigned his best radio operator to accompany her, along with Sergeant Murphy, who had observed her equipment expertise during their work in the supply depot. The small team prepared to move out under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous terrain toward the elevated positions. The journey to the ridgeline required careful movement through hostile territory, avoiding enemy patrols and observation posts while carrying the specialized sniper equipment. Maria led the way with the natural confidence of someone trained for exactly this type of mission, reading the landscape and identifying safe routes that would keep them undetected. As they reached the target position, Jenkins' voice came through the radio again, reporting that the enemy was moving into position for their final assault on the trap patrol. The operations center descended into controlled panic as multiple warning alarms blared simultaneously. Sarah watched Colonel Martinez and Major Thompson frantically coordinate with Regional Command, their voices overlapping as they requested immediate backup that everyone knew wouldn't arrive in time to help the trap squadron. "Eagle 1, we need those evasion vectors now." Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos, tight with the kind of controlled fear that only came from staring down incoming missiles. His wingmen echoed similar pleas, their aircraft dancing desperately through the sky as enemy targeting systems locked onto their heat signatures. Sarah stood up from her communications post, her decision crystallizing as she heard the terror barely contained in the pilots' voices. She had sworn an oath to protect her fellow service members, and that oath superseded any concerns about protocol or career consequences. Her specialized training wasn't meant to remain hidden when lives hung in the balance. Major Thompson spun around and shouted at her to get back to her station, but Sarah was already moving toward the main tactical display, her fingers accessing override codes that made several technicians look up in surprise. The classified countermeasure database opened under her authorization, revealing advanced evasion patterns that could thread the squadron through the missile gauntlet. Time slowed as she realized this moment would either save 6 pilots or destroy her military career forever. But the choice had already been made the instant she heard Rodriguez's desperate call for help. Sarah's fingers flew across the tactical interface as she uploaded the advanced evasion protocols directly to the squadron's navigation systems, bypassing the standard chain of command entirely. The main display screen lit up with complex flight patterns that made several technicians gasp in recognition of the sophisticated tactical algorithms. Major Thompson lunged toward her workstation, his face red with fury. "Chun, what the hell do you think you're doing? Stand down immediately," he bellowed, but Sarah continued her rapid data transmission, knowing that every second of delay meant death for the pilots trapped in the missile envelope. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice, now edged with desperate hope as his cockpit displays suddenly filled with precise evasion vectors. "Base, we're receiving new tactical data. Where is this coming from? These patterns are incredible," he transmitted while executing the first series of coordinated maneuvers that took his formation dancing between the incoming missiles. Colonel Martinez stared at the tactical display in shock, recognizing the advanced countermeasure protocols that were classified far above the clearance level of anyone currently in the operations center. "Chun," he said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and growing realization. "Where did you get access to Shadowhawk tactical systems?" Sarah met his gaze steadily while her hands continued working the controls, knowing that her cover was blown, but hearing the relief in the pilots' voices as they successfully evaded the first wave of missiles using her guidance. The operations center fell silent except for the steady stream of radio chatter as Rodriguez's squadron executed the complex evasion maneuvers with military precision. Sarah continued coordinating their flight paths through the missile field, her voice calm and professional as she guided them through patterns that seemed impossible to navigate safely. "Eagle 1, adjust heading 2 degrees starboard and climb to Angels 20, she transmitted, her tactical expertise evident in every precisely calculated instruction. The pilots responded instantly, their earlier mockery forgotten as they realized someone was saving their lives with skills they couldn't comprehend. Colonel Martinez stepped closer to her workstation, his weathered face showing growing recognition as he studied her clearance codes flashing across the authentication screen. "Lieutenant Chun," he said quietly, his tone completely changed from earlier dismissal. "What is your actual classification level?" Major Thompson stood frozen behind them, watching Sarah orchestrate the most complex tactical rescue he had ever witnessed. The woman he had dismissed as a supply clerk was demonstrating advanced combat coordination capabilities that exceeded his own training by decades. His jaw worked silently as the implications of his earlier behavior began to sink in. Through the radio, Rodriguez's voice carried pure gratitude and amazement. "Base, whoever is running this tactical coordination is a genius. We're threading these missiles like they're standing still. Request identification of our guardian angel." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she prepared to guide them through the final approach to safety.